How's it going, folks? Welcome to another fun at-home table read. Tonight, we are jumping into easily the most meta of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and one of my favorites, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I've never actually read this script, that's why I'm really curious to see where it goes. We're just going to jump right in, so let's start introducing ourselves.
Hey, I'm Anne, and I will be action description.
I'm Angie, and I'm playing Heather.
I'm Erik, I'll be Dylan.
I'm Jen, and I'm Julie.
I'm Steven, and I'll be Wes Craven.
I'm Curtis, I'm going to play John Saxon.
I'm Travis, and I'll be playing Chase.
And I'm Logan, and I'm going to be Robert Englund. All right, Anne, take us away.
Hello, a new nightmare. Fade in. Interior boiler room. Deep, grim music in ultra stereo, super saturated colors. Camera moves back and slick and ominous as we begin a series of close shots of grimy hands. Building a steel hand shining dully in the dark shadows of a filthy boiler room, being assembled slowly over metal fingers, composite sinew, the spark of a hammer on metal, and then the thing suddenly flexes as if alive. Close on remote control device, clean hands manipulating levers, the steel hand forms into a heavy fist. Thumps on a table, and then grimy hands of the creator thrust in again, begin affixing long, shiny blades to the end of the steel fingers. Closer on the blades, gleaming, dangerously long. Cutaways to furnaces, belching fire and smoke. Steam pipes hissing and dripping into endless depths of this hellish place. Excuse me. Yeah. The hand fitted with the final claw, now a super modern, almost futuristic version of Freddy's glove, flexing and trembling. The maker's right hand caresses it, then retracts and lays itself on a filthy workbench. The maker's left hand enters frame with a huge cleaver and raises it over the wrist of the right hand and then strikes down hard. Cut to a camera and dolly. Behind in the shadows, a shadowy crew gasps. We hear it in muffled, ew. The stump of the maker's right arm, now spurting blood, raises.
More blood, more blood.
I was very enthusiastic. I'm sorry. You're fine. Chuck Kateri, two young special effects assistants pump fake blood through the tubing using large plastic syringes. It's a messy job. They're covered with fake blood themselves, as their boss, Chase Porter, good looking, early 30s, tweaks the levers of a remote control device. Behind them at the edge of the set is Chase's wife, Heather Langenkamp, 30, dressed in woman's pajamas, and his son, Dylan, 5, watch from their chairs. Heather, appalled by the scene's violence, puts her hands over Dylan's startled eyes. The stump of the maker's arm now thrusts into the cuff of the steel hand. Synthetic tendons snake out of the steel hand and bury themselves in the maker's wrists. And the unseen actor flexes the razor-sharp steel blades, wheels and slashes into camera as we hear...
Cut! Fantastic!
Buzzer. The furnaces stop belching fire. Smoke and steam and water stop dead. Instead, there's chatter and lights and movement as the crew bustles into reset for the next take. The director, Wes Craven, rushes over to Chase and thumps him on the back.
Chase, you're a genius. This makes that old claw look like Mother Teresa's.
Chase waves them two hand towards his assistants.
You too, Terry, Chuck, great blood.
Thank you.
This is some of our best work.
Laughter. Craven cracks a bottle of Lipovidin, whatever that is. Chuck walks by with a dripping steel hand as Chase rumples Dylan's hair.
Want to see some neat stuff.
Oh, Jesus. Dylan looks up wide-eyed.
Chase, no.
Ha
Chase
ha
laughed.
ha. It's only make believe.
And lifts Dylan and leading Heather away. A Steadicam with them as they move offset through crew and equipment into a work area behind the boiler room flats. He sets Dylan on a workbench, the kids surrounded by snarling monster heads, long withered arms, eviscerated torsos, propped up in the corners and peering off temporary shelves, the handiwork of Chase's special effects makeup wizardry.
You hungry, Dylan?
He gave Dylan a large Chinese food takeout container. Dylan opens it and the reptilian head jumps out. Dylan gives a start as Chase laughs.
Ha ha. Yeah. Hee
Chase.
Chase takes it back from Dylan, shows it's only a hand puppet. Meanwhile, Chuck's brought the claw back from set and placed it on a work armature. I don't know if there's a Chuck, so I'll just be Chuck. It should have flex more. I think the servos got shorted out with blood.
Insulated with some styro. It wasn't designed to be submerged for Pete's sakes.
Heather looks at it eerily.
I don't like that thing.
He turns, a funny gleam in his eye.
This thing puts bread on our table.
Is it alive, Daddy?
Heather, you're the next shot. Heather turns a little confused.
Might as well be Dylan. State of the art animatronics enhanced with bio-organic graphing. Bull tendons, nerve bundles from a Doberman. Half the brain of a homicidal primate was.
Chase.
Heather is looking at the hand again, but now her expression is growing more alarmed. Chase looks over, reacts to the hand, flexing, trembling.
Hey!
Chase reaches out to steady the hand, but with incredible speed, it contorts. The claws flick, and Chase reels back with cry, staring at his own bloody fingers.
Shit.
Chase grabs the remote and switches it off. The claw falls still. The other assistant, Chuck, peers down at it in curiosity.
Must have picked up something from an 80s walkie-talkie.
He flops it over with a screwdriver and pokes at it. The hand lets out a little sound, half machine, half animal. Terry puts his hand near it, palm down, then looks at Chase.
You sure it's turned off?
It's off.
Funny. It's warm. Like a real hand.
Chuck leans down and peers more closely at it, goes to poke it again, but before his finger touches it, the claw-steeled hand leaps up and glues itself to his neck, its gleaming talons sinking into his throat. Chuck jerks back, clawing the thing away, clutching his throat as the blood spurts between his fingers. The hand smacks back down on the table and scrambles out of sight with a clatter of steel into the worn tools and equipment. Fast as some spiny creature from 1,000 fathoms. Heather screams, and Dylan draws back, pale and frightened, as Chase grabs the remote control and smashes it, pulls out the batteries and flings them away. Every furnace in the place suddenly roars back to life.
What the hell's going on? Kill the effects.
Fire, smoke, and steam howling as Chuck crashes blindly into Chase, and both go down. Terry claws cursing through the jumble atop the tool bench, trying to find where the damn thing went. Englund on the floor, the claw skitters down one leg of the bench fast as a wharf rat and attacks Terry's foot, slicing through his Achilles tendon. Terry shrieks and falls hard, and the instant he slams into the floor, the claw drives straight into his heart. Terry screams as the claw wheels and scrambles straight for the sprawl of Chase and Chuck's convulsing body. Close up on Chase, reacting in horror. Chase's POV to Chuck's body as the claw appears over rim of Chuck's shoulders, inches from Chase's face, spreading its talons wide.
Heather!
Interior bedroom day. Heather convulses in bed, terror elevated by.
Heather, earthquake.
Chase is already half out of bed, calling at her.
Get in the doorway.
The voice that jolts her first awake.
Dylan.
Oh, sorry.
A framed picture falls in the deafening crash and its glass shattering, narrowly missing Chase. Heather sprawls out of the room, interior stairwell continuous, handheld and rough, camera grabbing to the action as best as it can. Heather half runs, half braces against the bucking walls, while pictures in China shatter. Chase staggering behind her into interior Dylan's room. Day. The child sits upright among his twisted bedclothes, staring at the toys swinging wildly from a ceiling. Then it's over. The camera stabilizes, but remains handheld. There's not been, nor will there be, any music cues. The house has fallen still. The swimming pool, seen outside the window, slaps against its walls. There's a weird electronic ululation. Undulation? I don't know. Outside, up and down the street, like spaceships landing. Heather looks at Chase.
Car alarms. You okay?
She nods, scrambles up, and lifts Dylan, who's begun to cry. She hugs little Dylan. He's full of jagged energy, soaked with sweat.
You okay, Chief?
No.
You have a fever, sweetie?
Dylan shakes his head and Heather kisses him.
Just an earthquake, Dylan. Every once in a while we get a few.
No biggie, really.
Chase rumples the kid's hair. Then Dylan says solemnly,
Daddy. God.
Heather follows Dylan's eyes to Chase, his bloody hand. Chase notices with a start, grabbing one of Dylan's t-shirts and wrapping it, saying a bit too quickly,
Nothing, guys, just a scratch.
but it's already been dripping through the cotton.
Where do you get that?
Chase shrugs.
The picture, I guess, when it fell, it's nothing really.
He gives her a look like, cool, in front of the kid, at least, and turns.
I'll put a bandage on it. Don't worry about it.
And he goes out. Heather looks at Dylan and he looks at her. It's hard to say which is more frightened. Interior kitchen, dead day. Heather, keeping to herself, tries to make order from the mess in the cabinets. Chase, hand bandage, brooms, broken crockery until the kettle whistles, then abandons the cleanup to make instant coffee.
One of Mom's cups got broken.
I'm sorry, at least we're in one piece.
She says nothing. In the living room, the TV newscaster drones on about the morning's 5.5 quake, the latest of what seismologists are calling a swarm.
Do we have to watch that?
Chase, washing down a fast piece of toast, yawns and blinks.
I thought you turned it on.
He zaps it off. Heather eyes him, turns on Dylan, who's making a face in his oatmeal, scary eyes, gape of mouth.
Dylan, it's breakfast, not arts and crafts. What?
You get any sleep last night?
More or less. Dylan, it's time to get dressed. I'm late.
You going away?
Just for a few hours, Julie will be with you.
He sighs and goes into his room. Interior Chase in Heather's bedroom later. Day. The two dress Heather rather smartly. Chase in jeans and a sweatshirt is packing a small overnighter. Chase again notes Heather's withdrawal.
Anything other than the obvious bothering you?
5 earthquakes in 3 weeks is enough.
Hasn't been another call, has there?
She shakes her head. Chase looks relieved.
2 full weeks without him. Maybe he got run over by a truck.
Heather doesn't seem to take any comfort in this.
He feels closer, if anything. It's giving me nightmares.
He looks at her more closely.
You have one last night?
She finally nods yes, but he softens his voice.
It's just a reaction to the earthquake, Heather.
Maybe. Or maybe I shouldn't do this interview today.
You got to go back on the horse sometime. Look, you've had a nutcase making harassing phone calls. I know how scary that feels.
No, you don't.
Okay, but it still doesn't mean it can't be over with.
She turns away.
What if it isn't over?
Maybe you should tell me your dream.
She gives a shrug. It's silly to even talk about it.
It was nothing. We were both working on some movie and a special effects thing went horribly wrong. Terry and Chuck were hurt. You were cut even.
You probably were half awake and saw me get nicked by that picture glass. Dreams work like that. You want me not to go on this job?
Just be careful, okay?
I should survive 2 days in Palmdale supplying soap bubbles for a detergent commercial, don't you think?
Guess so.
48 hours. Be back before you know it.
He kisses her and she kisses back, holding on a moment. Then he grabs his suitcase and exits. Heather closes her eyes, hears him say goodbye to Dylan downstairs, and hears the front door close. Then a brittle breaking sound. Heather looks up and sees four thin cracks snaking down her bedroom wall. A moment later, the TV can be heard again. Excuse me, interior dente. Heather races down to find Chase, but is stopped when she sees Dylan directly in front of the TV screen, impassively watching her. As Nancy in Nightmare 1, looking in horror to insert TV from Nightmare 1, Tina and the bloody body bag standing in the doorway to Nancy's schoolroom. Nancy! Close up of Nancy reacting in terror.
Dylan, I don't want you watching that.
Back to Heather, she snaps off the TV, then with fury pulls out the plug of the wall as well. The instant she does, the silent child lets out an ear-piercing howl.
Dylan, stop it. What in the world's gotten into you?
The phone rings. Dylan instantly falls silent. Heather looks at him. He's eerily still now, just watching her. The phone rings a second time and she snatches it up, still distracted by her son's eyes.
Hello?
Through a deep roaring of boilers, we hear a strange, garbled voice sing.
1, 2.
It was terrifying. She reacts and slams it down, stares at it. The sound of the voice, deep, murderous, mocking, a flawless imitation of Freddy. Scared now, she runs to the front door just in time to see exterior Heather's POV of the street. Chase's pickup truck giving a honk as it drives off. Interior kitchen door.
Chase.
But he hasn't heard her and soon is out of sight. Heather closes the door, turns and sees Dylan still staring at her.
Someone's coming.
What?
An instant later, something gives the whole house a subtle shake, rattling everything in it. Heather grabs Dylan, but there's nothing more. Then the doorbell rings. Heather freezes, paralyzed by unspeakable fear. Then
Heather?
Heather opens the door to Julie. Direct, open-faced young woman, she blinks at Heather's pale face.
Everything okay?
Heather nods sheepishly.
Yeah, Julie, I'm sorry. I just thought there was an earthquake. I think little one, but
Big truck went right by before you opened the door. Life on the fall line.
She looks past Heather, gives Dylan a smile.
Hey, Tiger.
She lifts him with a laugh. Heather watches the two fighting a wave of vertigo.
you think he has a fever? He feels warm to me this morning.
Julie feels his forehead.
Oh, thanks. Seems okay. Is that all that's wrong? You seem...
The telephone rings again. Heather snatches it up.
Leave us alone, you creep.
LA limousine, ma'am? Just want you to know I'm out front.
Julie looks at her with surprise. Heather walks to the front door and checks. Exterior, Heather's POV of the street. A black limo idles in the driveway. Back in the kitchen.
Sorry, hang on a minute.
Heather closes the door and returns to the kitchen and hangs up the
Heather.
phone.
Heather, what is it?
No, I just have this feeling today.
She bites her lip, and then Dylan speaks soberly, quietly.
Mommy, stay home then.
He turns and walks into his room. Julie looks at Heather.
He'll be fine. Don't worry.
She goes in the bedroom after Dylan. Heather takes a long breath, then grabs the phone and dials.
Studio B.
Hi, this is Heather Langenkamp.
The car's no dead?
No, listen, I can't make it in today.
You're kidding, right?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Listen, damn it.
I just can't.
She hangs up, starts for Dylan's room, then the phone rings. Heather comes back and picks it up, fully expecting it to be the studio and dreading it.
Yes.
She reacts, realizing too late she's listening to the hiss of steam.
1, 2.
She slams the phone down, stares at the thing like it was a snake. It rings again. She hesitates. She picks it up finally, holds it at a distance for a moment, and then puts it to her ear.
Hello?
Freddy's coming for you.
She recoils and slams it down, turns and kicks a chair. Crash. Senses someone behind her and rolls around to see Julie standing in Dylan's doorway.
What is it, Heather?
Heather blinks.
Damn caller.
Julie crosses to her, lowering her voice so Dylan can't hear.
He started again.
Heather just nods.
Sick bastard. Sorry. Dylan, he doesn't have a fever like you thought. Probably just your nerves.
Heather gives her a funny look.
Nerves?
Julie blushes.
I just meant from the shaker this morning. I mean, everyone's freaked out at how many we've been having, and then the calls.
Heather starts to say something, and then the phone rings again, and she snatches it up and shouts.
Stop calling me, you son of a bitch.
You talk to your agent this way? And you try to cancel an appearance on an AMLA at the last minute. What the hell is wrong with you?
Heather sags in dismay.
I'm sorry, Jerry. I can't leave the house right now.
I have to follow this. What? You single-handedly bury your career? Lose your house? Put your husband and kid out on the street? Or just give your old agent a heart attack?
Okay, fine. I'll be there. It's just the call started again.
Sorry, caught me off guard. Jerry switches to his commiserative voice.
God. Unfortunately, this kind of crap is a part of the business these days, Heather. Have you thought about buying a good handgun?
I've got a 5-year-old in the house, Jerry.
He's an LA kid. He probably already has one. Call me after the interview. Okay.
And he hangs up. Heather looks and sees Dylan staring at her from his doorway.
Dylan, I gotta go. Forgive me?
Bye.
She crosses and gives him a big hug. We see his face over her shoulder. Lost. Exterior of their house. Stay. Heather and Julie exit an attractive house in an affluent area.
I'll call the cops for you. You've got the number on the fridge, right?
Thanks. Just given the time he called. They're keeping a list, supposedly. Sorry, my nerves are just so raw these days.
It's okay.
Julie gives a wave as Heather heads down the walk, closer on Heather, now eyeing the dark car in the drive, slowing as she sees the driver, waiting, holding the back door. A big man, faced away, head distinctively bald, could almost be Freddy. He turns, it's just the driver, a pale face and antsy. Heather gets in, interior limo, exterior TV studio, moving day. Heather, staring out the window, lost in thought. Oh, the driver studies her intently with his mirror.
You played that girl, that movie, with the guy with the... Yeah, sure. That's you. That's what I love about this job. I get to meet the stars.
I'm hardly a star.
You kidding? I love your stuff. First was the best, where your girlfriends are cut open and dragged across the ceilings. Awesome. Oh shit, 10 and 2. And when all that blood comes out of your boyfriend's bed, I thought I wanted to shit the bed.
Heather finds the switch for the window between them, gives a nasty look as the gap closes.
But they should have never killed off Freddy.
Heather sinks back into the leather. A moment later, the limo lurches to a stop of her door, and the door is jerked open. A young man leans in and grabs her arm.
Heather, we're going to have to run.
Exterior TV station parking lot day. He nearly yanks her out of the car. Interior TV studio. Lights blinding into a lens. Camera tips down to reveal Heather and a smiling talk show host.
So, Heather, we're coming up on the 10th anniversary of the first Nightmare on Elm Street. It's 5 sequels later. Plus, how amazing this series has affected your life personally.
Heather strains for a smile and shrugs.
I don't know if it has really, with the exception of 1 and 3, I've pretty much kept out of it. I'm working in television now. The hours let me spend more time with my husband and my little boy.
Now that you have a child, is it possible you've decided horror is bad for children?
No, not really.
Do you let your children watch your movies?
My child? No, but
What about another sequel? Is Freddy really dead?
Heather twitches, responding a little too quickly.
of course he is. Freddy's dead and gone.
And how about your co-star in Nightmare 1? Would you trust him alone with your child?
Robert?
Maybe we should ask him. We got a surprise, Heather. A great big surprise for you and our audience.
A discernible rustle goes through the place. Heather smiles gamely, not knowing what the hell they're pulling. The host stands and yells.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the best of the bad, Robert Englund.
And Robert Englund strolls out with a good-natured wave in full Freddy makeup. That's terrifying. His fans erupt with a thunderous applause and cheers. After deafening whistles, the boys, many dressed in Freddy costume, complete with plastic claws, settle into a chant of Freddy, Freddy, Freddy. Englund stalks into the spotlight, hooks his claw through the air and growls.
You're all my children now.
The place goes wild. Hold on, Heather, looking at that red and green back, cavorting against the blinding light. Steel claws waving and poking as Englund milks it for all it's worth, reminded of a nightmare she'd much rather forget. Interior green rooms, exterior walkways, outside day. Heather gathers her things. In an adjoining room, Robert stands in the hall at the doorway to the outside, casually elegant now, and civilian, signing autographs for a throng of kids. He glances at her out of the corner of his eye, sensing her mood.
Okay.
I'm fine.
Everything went great, I thought. We really got you, didn't we?
I don't know why you didn't tell me, that's all.
He waves off the last of the kids and closes his outside door, crossing into her room and exiting with her. Camera follows as they walk. Kids blockaded in background by studio security heading away.
Hey, they loved the expression on your face. I think they'd love to see us together again.
Heather glances back at the kids yelling after him.
In what, a romantic comedy?
Just because it's a love story doesn't mean it can't have a decapitation or two.
The PA reappears with a cellular phone.
Ever? Call for you?
Heather looks at the phone and puts it to her ear.
Yes?
Heather, this is Sara Risher over at New Line. How are you?
Oh, hi. I'm fine, Sarah. I got a voice from the past.
Really? Listen, Heather, I won't take about a minute of your time. It's just that we have something to propose to you and wonder if you'd stop by the offices. Bob would love to talk to you.
Sure, when?
Yeah, no time like the present. The car will bring you.
Now?
Just take a minute. You'll be glad you did, I bet.
Just say no. Exterior to international offices of New Line Cinema. Day. Heather exits limo and starts into a modern office building with a sign reading New Line Cinema. Interior outer office. New Line Cinema. Day. A sprawling space with a maze of buff-colored file cases defining dozens of workspaces populated by smart-looking 20-something people. Heather stops at a machine steel front desk. A receptionist with dark purple lipstick and Doc Martens peers up.
I feel seen and attacked. Help you?
I'm here to see Bob Shea.
The receptionist checks out her casually.
Was Bob expecting you? Heather!
Heather turns as Sarah Risher crosses to give her a maternal hug.
Bob's dying to see you.
Wider, moving with them as Sarah leads Heather further back into the place, grabbing a young man by the elbow.
Heather, this is Mike DeLuca. Mike, Heather Langenkamp, our little Nancy's come back home.
Hey, I'm a fan. Great meeting you.
He ducks into someone else's office, giving a high five and closing the door. Sarah smiles at Heather.
Can I get you something to drink?
Coffee would be nice.
Sounds good. Tim, would you get Heather and I a coffee? How you like it, hon?
Black's fine.
Me too.
They reached a huge stainless steel door. Sarah raps twice and pushes it open, gesturing to Heather inside. Interior Bob Shea's office day. Heather finds herself in a bright post-industrial workspace. There's an unadorned desk behind a Warhol of Freddy ×4. Double doors are thrown open into the terrace, and out there, a cordless telephone pressed to his ear is Bob Shea. He gives a wave and starts inside.
Yep. I gotta go. But come when you get to Milan. And don't forget, risotto con tartufi. Fantastico. You have fun.
He tosses it down and gives Heather a two-handed shake.
Great seeing you, Heather. How are things?
Fine. I don't have to ask how you're doing.
He shrugs, admitting.
So far, so good. Maybe we can send a little your way too, if you're up for it.
He gestures to an area of Italian leather and gleaming glass and sits as an assistant brings the coffee. There are 2 cups, and he immediately drinks from one, watching her gulp hers.
I'll cut to the chase, Heather. You interested in making the definitive nightmare with us?
Heather lowers her cup and taken off guard.
I thought you'd killed Freddy off.
We did. Bad mistake. The fans are clamoring for more. Evil never dies, right? Anyway, a while back, we got a call from Wes. He's got this idea. And who better to resurrect Freddy than his creator?
I thought he'd stop doing horror.
Believe it or not, he told me I hadn't heard from him in 10 years because he hasn't had any good nightmares. There is inspiration. But now he's got a new script in the works.
She notes Bob biting his thumbnail.
Which means he's having nightmares again?
He's very excited about it.
The nightmares?
Oh, he's excited about the script. You should be too. It stars you.
Can I read it?
He's not showing it until it's done. But it sounds hot, and we wanted to get all our stars lined up in case it is. You and Robert got great ratings today, which is the first thing we needed to know.
You mean that was a...
Sort of a trial balloon.
Heather blinks.
I don't know, Bob. I'm flattered and all, but I've got a kid now.
So
I don't know about horror.
Oh, come on. Kids love horror.
And I've got other things happening.
I'm sure that we can match any offer.
It's not that. I've got a fan.
Ouch. He gets up too.
Sweetie, you got lots of fans. We've done market studies. You rate right up there. We've already got Chase working on a prototype for the glove.
What?
I know. We asked him to keep it kind of a surprise until we talked. Look, how about we get in touch with your agent? You still with Jerry?
Yes, but
Look, we'll work something out. I'm sure you'll be happy with it.
Heather turns in the door.
Bob, how long has Wes been working on the script?
I don't know, a couple of months. Why?
And since you've been thinking of making it, has anything funny happened?
I don't follow.
Like weird calls by any chance?
His phone rings behind him. He makes no move to pick it up, then the phone rings again.
Or nightmares?
Phone rings again.
Why don't you pick up your phone, Bob?
Shay shrugs.
That's what people get paid around here for.
The assistant picks up the phone and straightens.
It's Ted in New York. He wants to find out how the glove is coming.
Bob gives a nervous laugh.
I gotta take that. Keep in touch.
Heather nods and says quietly.
You too, Bob.
She turns and starts to go, then stops. In her POV, for the first time, she notices everyone in the outer office has a cup of steaming coffee in his or her desk. Heather gets the hell out of there. Exterior, Heather's house day. The limo pulls up and stops. The driver opens the door and Heather exits and walks to the house. Halfway there, she starts to hear screams. Interior, Heather's house day. Heather bursts in and stops cold. From Dylan's room comes terrible screaming. Interior, Dylan's room day. Heather runs in and finds Julie by the bed with Dylan, the boy convulsing and screaming with terrifying intensity. She rushes over and holds him, terrified. Strange and alien words are spilling from his mouth, a language ripped from another world, not connected with our own reality at all, until suddenly it's English, and he says in a clear and terrifyingly deep voice,
Never sleep again. Never sleep again.
Then he starts sobbing as if his heart will break. Heather looks at Julie in shock.
What's going on? Was he watching that movie on TV again?
Julie just blinks.
Movie? He hasn't been watching any TV at all. He was taking his nap when I heard screaming.
Julie stops, shaking herself. Heather looks at the child. Dylan turns, catches her eye with his own, and says through his tears,
Rex saved me.
Rex? Who's Rex?
Dylan pulls a stuffed dinosaur out from beneath the covers and gives it to Heather, and it nearly falls apart in her hands, its body torn by 4 deep cuts, its stuffing pouring out. Heather looks at Dylan.
Is Rex gonna die?
Heather shakes her head.
No, Rex is not going to die. Julie, you know where the sewing stuff is, don't you?
Sure. We'll do an operation. Dr. Dylan and Dr. Julie will fix him as good as new.
Julie takes the thing, grabs Dylan, and heads to the kitchen. Heather glances back at Dylan's bed. Interior kitchen, Heather is in hushed conversation with Chase. Background, Julie sews on Rex, accompanied by a worried Dylan. Then Chase's voice.
Heather.
Chase, hi.
Interior, Chase's special effects trailer day. Chase, on a cellular, is in the back of his trailer working on frothing up of a tub of soap suds. In the background, set aside in mid-construction, is something shiny and sharp, something we instantly recognize as Freddy's new glove.
What's up?
Chase, you'd better come home.
I'm stuck here. Neither Chuck or Terry came in today. I can't get away.
Chase, it's Dylan.
He stands forgetting his emergency, holding his breath.
What? Oh, sorry. What?
Back to the kitchen, Heather's nearly crying.
He's had some sort of episode.
What kind of episode?
He was just acting very strange. He thinks somebody's after him, Chase. It's scary. It scared me. He was acting like
what?
Like Freddy.
Heather, has there been another call?
Heather just closes her eyes, fear suppressing an answer, demanding another question instead.
Chase, why didn't Chuck or Terry show up?
Forget those 2 clowns, Heather. Answer me. Did you get another call from that guy or not?
Heather bites her lip and nods.
Yes.
I'll be there in 3 hours.
Don't speed, Chase. It's not.
But he's already hung up, cutting to Chase, jumping off the tailgate and running for his pickup. Camera holds him at a beat, and then he moves up and into the back of the truck again. And the place on the workbench where the glove was is now empty. Exterior, Heather's house night. Storybook peaceful. Interior Dylan's room night. Heather sits next to the bed, one elbow on the quilt, reading from the age-old fable of Hansel and Gretel. Dylan scrunched under the blankets, only his head is visible, calm as you please. The sole light comes from the child's bedside table lamp.
As soon as the sun was up, the witch made Gretel fetch the wood and kindle a fire. We will bake cookies first, she said. I have heated the oven and kneaded the dough. Crawl in and see if the fire is blazing high enough now. And she pushed Gretel toward the oven. The witch meant to shut the door and bake her once she was inside. Dylan, this is too violent. I don't know why you like these stupid old tales.
Finish, please.
This is going to give you nightmares.
I like this story.
Heather sighs and picks the book back up.
But Gretel guessed what the witch was planning. I don't know how to get in, Gretel said. How am I to manage it? Stupid girl, shouted the witch, rushing up to the oven. The opening is big enough. See, I can fit it in myself. Then quickly Gretel came behind and pushed with all her might, plunging the wicked old woman headlong into the flames, banging the door shut and bolting it tight. The witch howled. That's enough.
Dylan stares off into the night.
The witch howled like a scalded cat, but Gretel ran away and left her there to perish nonetheless.
Heather looks down at Dylan in surprise, then at the page exactly as Dylan said. The words are there. He turns and says the rest straight to her, eyes glittering, almost entranced.
She ran to her brother as fast as she could and flung open the door. Hansel, Hansel, she cried. We are saved. The witch is dead.
His face is lit up with fierce radiance and Heather licks her lips.
Time for sleep.
Say how they found their way home.
She turns out the light.
Tomorrow night.
No, tonight. It's important.
Heather looks at him in the moonlight, wide awake, tugging at her sleeve. She has to laugh.
Dylan, you know as well as I do, they follow the trail of breadcrumbs back to their house.
Dylan sinks back with a smile.
Then their father covered them with kisses, and they were safe.
They were safe and could sleep.
She checks him in and then notices something, a bump under the covers, down by Dylan's feet. She pats it, curious.
Rex.
He picks a flashlight off of his nightstand, pokes his head under the comforter and motions for her to follow. She smiles and curiously sticks her head under too. Under the comforter is a colorful tent. Dylan is aiming the beam towards the bottom of the bed, and the large stuffed T-Rex there, snarling in the center of the sheet. Its back is turned to them. It's sewn together again, but the body looks much worse for the wear.
Rex keeps him from coming up.
Who?
The mean old man with the claws.
He points past the creature to the bottom edge of the tent.
He wants to come up from down there while we sleep. I keep my feet up here. Rex keeps him down there. He's my guard. You should have a guard too.
That's terrifying. Heather unexpectedly feels lightheaded.
Dylan, there's nothing down there. Look.
She reaches past the dinosaur and lifts the blankets, exposing the bottom edge of the bed and the floor beyond.
See?
Excuse me. Dylan stares at it a long moment, then shrugs.
It's different when you're gone.
Outside the blankets again, Heather tucks him in, turns off his nightlight.
On, please.
Okay, sweetie. Night-night. Sleep tight.
Don't let the bed bugs bite.
She kisses him gently and leaves the room, but not before his voice catches her in the doorway.
Daddy coming home?
He's on his way.
He can follow the breadcrumbs, right?
Right.
She leaves him, closing the door, and Dylan lays quietly to the night.
If the birds don't eat them first.
What? Exterior chases pick up night. As soon as it roars down the cutting highway through a bleak desert moonscape, interior chases pick up night. Chase's face is marked by concern and fatigue. He picks up at his mobile phone and dials, gets nothing but static, swears and tosses it down, squints his eyes against oncoming brights, and shakes his head, suppressing a yawn. His point of view is the road, white lines strobing hypnotically, closer on his face, eyes bloodshot and drooping, whiter. He shakes his head again, turns on the radio, static, pushes search. The horrible blast of static after another, and then a distant station.
Tectonic nightmare, fault line hitherto unknown seems to have spread so extensive.
Radio, a hand punches it off, silence, and then just the pluck of rubber over expansion joints. Chase's eyes drooping further. Exterior road and pickup's wheels continuous, low on the tires, so gradually crossing the flash of white line. Ominous music creeps in. Interior Chase's pickup, night. Chase, snapping awake again, shaking his head. The music disappears. Clothes on his hands, scratching his leg, rubbing sore muscles. Refocused to seat between his legs. Music sneaks back, and with a barely audible rip, something shiny and sharp pokes up through the fabric. Then another and another. Bright spikes of steel at first just tips, then longer and longer until 4 long claws are thrusting up, straining to break out of the fabric. On Chase's face, singing somberly to himself to stay awake.
This is me, losing my religion. Look at me, losing my...
Oh my God, I can't even. Reaches down his hand, enters frame at a crotch level, rearranging things with a quick jest, and the claws were just out of the way until his hand is gone.
Oh, there, I'm talking religion.
Close up of Chase, taking deep breaths, rubbing his face, then noticing there's a torn piece of upholstery clinging to one finger. He tosses it away, stares blearily back to the road. As he slides deeper and deeper towards sleep, the clawed steel hand from Heather's opening nightmare rises into frame just beneath his chin now, by his jugular, until Chase falls asleep, his eyes closing for good, head falling forward on a slack neck. Instantly, the claws strike upwards, hard, and jerk down through his body. His shirt flies open. The claw buries itself into his crotch, and Chase's deafening shriek carries over into interior living room night. Heather wakes up screaming. Music vanishes. Heather bolts upright on the couch, staring around, seeing Dylan watching her solemnly from the doorway near his room.
Mommy scared?
They're still half asleep and disoriented. Tries to put calm into her voice.
Mommy's fine, Dylan. Just had a bad dream. What are you doing out of bed?
Bex woke me up. He was fighting.
Aw. Before she can respond, the doorbell rings. Heather shrugs off the last of the dream, stares at the door. Who the hell is out there at this hour?
Dylan, you go back to sleep now.
Not sleepy.
She looks through the peephole, reacts, turns to Dylan, her voice suddenly flat.
Dylan, go back to bed. I mean it.
Dylan looks at her a moment longer, then obediently goes into his room. By now, Heather's shaking so hard she can hardly work the bolt on the door. When she opens, she faces 2 highway patrol officers.
Heather Langenkamp,
Yes.
is Chase Porter your husband?
Yes.
I'm afraid there was an accident. It appears he fell asleep while driving, ma'am.
She reaches out, steadies herself with a hand to the wall. For the first time, she notices the patrol car parked in her drive.
Was he hurt?
I'm afraid it's worse than that, ma'am.
Heather he weaves in the night air, her voice hardly perceptible.
Is he dead?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you sure it's him?
We have his effects. You can confirm from that.
He hands over a clear plastic bag with a wallet, watch, and some money. Heather doesn't even take them.
I want to see the body.
No, you don't, ma'am. It's not necessary.
I want to see it for myself.
And the way she says it rules out any possibility that she will not do exactly that. Interior, the morgue, basement corridor. Heather, her feet echo into the cold marble, walking down the hall lined with gurneys holding bodies under sheets. From off screen, one direction can be heard the distant sound of a woman's single gut deep wail. Then from another, male laughter, chat, and sound of electrical tool whizzing away at something. Interior morgue, night. Heather enters. At the rear of this very large room, two men are eating lunch out of a paper bag. A third is working at a body, lifting something dark and wet onto a scale.
Help you?
Porter. Chase Porter.
He peers at her, a bloody rubber glove poised mid-air.
Got a new one?
One of the men eating lunch points.
Over there. Third from the sink.
Heather goes over, camera moving with her hand held. The lunch eater follows with her, wiping his hands on his apron, checking the toe tag, a thing very much like a pale blue credit card.
You say Chase?
Heather just nods, her heart in her throat. The man's voice is surprisingly compassionate.
Sorry.
He lifts the sheet carefully, just offering a peek at the face. Heather forces herself to look. It's Chase. And something about the sweet, sleep-like quality to his face hits Heather harder than the bloodless pallor or the slightly broken egg misshaping of his head. The man lowers the sheet and fetches a clipboard, hanging at the foot of the stainless steel table.
Just sign at the bottom. That's all we need.
But Heather is just staring at the sheet, head ever so slightly tilted, as if there's one thing she saw under there she's not quite through with.
Let me see once more.
I'm sorry.
Lift the sheet again.
He looks, sees she's serious, and lifts it.
More.
He lifts a little more. Still, it's only down to Chase's chin, but it's enough. And in a deadly, still voice, Heather asks,
What's that?
she's pointing at the flap of whitish skin beneath Chase's skin.
Well, this was a bad wreck, ma'am. I mean, his head's gonna be okay for the funeral and all, but
Heather reaches out suddenly and pulls the sheet back much farther. One horrendous instant, we glimpse a torso sewn back together with a rough mortician stitches along 4 deep, savage slashes. The lunch eater pulls the sheet back over Chase as Heather spins and vomits.
you okay, lady?
He offers her a piece of white muslin to wipe her mouth. She does so with shaking hands and asks with a shaken, terrified whisper,
What did that?
The man blinks a moment.
Ma'am, it was head on. I heard the truck was torn up, something awful. You can imagine how he'd not exactly be in top shape.
Heather, still crouched, looks back at the gurney looming above her.
It looks like he was clawed.
Yeah, well, that's why we don't lift the sheet past the face, ma'am. Sometimes what you don't see is what gets you through the night.
Exterior cemetery day. Surrounded by her friends, Heather buries her husband. There are several recognizable faces here in addition to Bob and Sara, especially to the Elm Street fans. Robert Englund, Johnny Depp, Wes Craven, John Saxon, among others. There is no media or fans. The funeral has been kept from the press. Heather stands apart from the rest, holding Dylan's hand. On his other side is Julie, touching his shoulder. Only a slight twitching of the boy's hand betrays emotion as he solemnly watches the casket lowered. As it disappears beneath the brink, a sudden wind moves through the trees. A moment later, a sharp jolt rolls through the place. Instantly, there are cries of earthquake, and the shock continues. The ground heaving and the men winching the coffin falls backwards. Several gravestones and monuments tumble. The coffin itself tilts wickedly and then falls. and first into the pit, hitting with a sickening crack. Heather lurches forward instinctively, loses balance, falls, and hits hard, head against the framework over the grave. Mass confusion for the rest of the people, ducking, stumbling over gravestones, generally grabbing for something solid. Then that eerie still again. Just dogs and car alarms. Heather shakes herself, twists around looking for Dylan, sees he's not with Julie, hisses desperately at the girl.
Julie, we're still in.
Julie looks around dazed. Everyone nearby looks for the child, and God knows for what reason. Heather checks the grave and reacts in horror. Her POV. In the merest fraction of a second, we see the coffin is split open, the lid ajar, and incredibly, the leering face of someone who looks a lot like Freddy Krueger, darker, even harder, but definitely in that mode, ducks back deeper into the dark of the coffin after a split second of eye contact with Heather. He's dragging Dylan after him. Without hesitation, Heather jumps into the pit amid gasps of astonishment from the dazed onlookers, even as Dylan disappears into the coffin with a terrible yank. In the pit with Heather, wrenching back the coffin lid, seeing Dylan about to vanish down to the dark slot in the foot of the coffin, just like the danger area beneath the blankets. Inside the coffin, Heather is diving under the winding sheets and grabbing Dylan's hand, hauling back. For the briefest instant, she gulps the long arm of Freddy's red. She glimpses the long arm of Freddy's red and green striped sweater, the wicked glove and blades, all snaking down out of sight into darkness. His mocking laughter echoes over her. Heather hurls up with all of her might, pulling the child back over the bloody remains of her husband, the Dylan screaming in the fright. And at the sight of Chase's face, his dead eyes staring in horror into her own, Heather passes out close in on her face, rolling to the side, and now gentler hands are touching her, trying to rouse her, pulling her back to reveal Heather on the ground at the graveside, Robert Englund, Wes Craven, and John Saxon hovering over her in concern. She looks around in panic.
Dylan?
He's right here. It's okay.
Saxon points. Heather turns and sees Dylan watching down at her with that terrible, intense, eerie look. Held by the frightened Julie, a terrible dizziness sweeps over Heather.
What happened?
Quake knocked you off her feet. Got bumped pretty good, actually.
Excuse me, hold on. I'm so sorry. Heather turns and sees the men. I've already have the coffin back level. The lid is not open, the coffin isn't split. Wider now, sirens and a faint hubbub from the surrounding city. Those gathered are clearly shaken, and the minister raises his hands as a subtle but ominous aftershock rolls by.
May he rest in peace, children, and may you all get home safely.
Immediately, several head for their cars, close around Heather, shivering. She stands to go and turns to go and bumps right into Robert Englund. She gives a start. He puts his hand on her shoulder, moving in closer. We could just hear him murmur.
If there's anything I can do, Heather. Anything.
As he moves off, pulling a wide brim, not quite Freddy like hat over his head, Heather watches him go as John Saxon puts a big arm around her. Behind, Wes Craven looks up at the sky, getting late in the day, and the wind is picking up. Exterior Heather's house, night. The cottage huddled against a strong Santa Ana as a streetlight nearby throws eerie shadows on the roof. Interior, Chase in Heather's bedroom. Heather lies in bed, awake, listening to the wind howl. She pulls the blankets closer and tries to close her eyes. Then she becomes aware of another sound, this one from downstairs. A muffled sing-song and a pad of a small feet. Heather stands listening, grabs a robe and rushes down to the den. Night. And Heather peeks around the corner of the stairwell, and and to her dismay, sees Dylan circling den, eyes closed, mouth slurring something, sleepwalking. Heather crosses, not knowing whether to wake him or not. He hovers by the TV for a moment. It's also on, this one running silent images of TV. Heather as Nancy in the boiler room for the first time, again from Nightmare 1, seeing Freddy step out from behind the furnace, backlit, dark, clawed. Close in on Heather, reacting, scared now. Dylan still asleep, veers away blindly, bumps to the coffee table, and then heads for the kitchen. Heather's had enough. She catches up with him softly and circles him in her arms. Closer on the two, she shakes him gently.
Dylan, sweetie, wake up, baby.
Awakening, Dylan's eyes snap wide in fear. His mouth gapes open in a startled cry, and he flails out of her arms onto the floor. Heather desperately trying to gather him back up, and then he seems to recognize her and falls still. Only his labored breathing breaks the stunned silence, his eyes staring wide at Heather.
Dylan, baby, we're gonna get you back to bed now.
The child shakes his head violently, tears springing.
I can't sleep there, Mommy, please.
You've got to sleep, Dylan.
She never finishes the sentence because Dylan suddenly sings a thin, plaintive voice.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
I just lost my place. Heather, feeling her head swim through an unexpected wash of vertigo, can barely find her voice.
Dylan, did you hear that in the movie?
Dylan looks at her confused.
What movie?
Heather looks at the TV. There's nothing there. The set is off. And not only that, it's still unplugged from that morning. She looks back at the child.
Then where did you hear that song? Did you answer the phone?
Dylan shakes his head.
In my bed.
Your bed?
Under my covers. Kids singing. And way down there, the man. The mean man.
He makes the sign of the claw.
And what's the man doing?
Trying to get up. Trying to get into our world.
And then Dylan stops, startled by the warm run of liquid over his upper lip. His nose has started to course, dark red blood.
Oh shit, Dylan.
He touches his hand to it, stares at the bright surprise, and Heather snatches him up, rushes into the bathroom. Framed in that distant doorway, she dabs his face, soothes silent tears. Interior chase in Heather's bedroom night. Heather, back in bed, is listening to the window howl. Dylan is curled against her side, peaceful as a baby now, breath deep and regular. But if Heather thinks he's asleep, she's wrong.
Where's Daddy now?
Heather gives a start, looks down. Dylan's looking up at her, waiting for the answer.
Daddy's in heaven. Dylan, he's with God now.
Dylan thinks a moment.
Do you have to die to see God?
No, I don't think so. You just have to pray or reach.
He curls against her tighter.
Why does God let there be bad things?
I honestly don't know. Try to sleep, baby.
Can you come with me in my dreams?
Heather pulls the covers over him further.
I think that only happens in the movies, but I'll always be here when you get back. And I'll make sure nobody grabs your toes either.
She tickles his toes. He lets out a giggle and closes his eyes. Heather does not close hers. In fact, she reaches over and finds a still steaming cup of coffee stashed on her bedside table. It takes a long gulp. Under the covers, we see Dylan's hand reach down and touch Rex. He turns the snarling beast to face the darkness at the bottom of the bed. Exterior playground day. Sun a warm yellow. Children playing under the watchful eyes of mothers. Nearby, Dylan runs a stick around the palings of the playground. Rocket, somber and tentative. Pan to find Heather and John Saxon, the man in the immaculate sweats, tan and fit. A reassuring presence, if ever there was one, listening intently as Heather speaks.
I know what he's doing is bizarre, but most of the time he seems so normal, so well adjusted. I just can't believe it's him. I mean, and not something outside influencing him. Or is that how denial works?
When is denial? I don't think that's the case here, but if you're really worried, have a doctor check him out. You'll see everything's fine.
Heather looks back at him.
You're not just saying that to help a crazy friend cope, are you?
Saxon shakes his head.
All of Dylan's behavior is understandable for a kid dealing with a parent's death. How can a child process such a thing?
Heather shakes her head, same low.
Don't know. Haven't been able to process it very well myself.
Saxon looks at her.
You're not crazy, by the way.
Thinking I saw Freddy in the grave feels pretty crazy. And jumping in,
You didn't jump in.
that's my memory. And it seemed absolutely real.
Seemed, not was.
It's in my family, you know? My grandmother died in an institution.
Really? How? Having a screwy family made you crazy to want to be one colossal nut house.
She looks at him. Well, he laughs and she does too.
Look, you got a crazy fan after you. That's what's making you crazy. Probably Dylan too.
I've never mentioned it to him.
Kids know when something's bugging a parent. You've got no idea who's this is calling?
She turns and watches Dylan.
Freddy, for all I know.
Steady.
Heather tries to smile.
A man or a boy with a deep, Freddy voice.
6 weeks of this and you're surprised you got Freddy in your dreams? Hell, Sonny Bono says after a while he was seeing his stalker everywhere. Even at mass.
Really?
Absolutely. Sometimes Letterman called the cops thinking that woman was down in his kitchen again. Gets under your skin if you let it.
You really think Dylan's okay?
Saxon gives her a paternal look.
Dylan's fine. You're fine. Hurting, but fine. Definitely not crazy.
Cut to the playground rocket, a tall structure standing over 25 feet high. Dylan has unexpectedly made his way all the way to its top level and is squeezed out through a broken guard band. Right now, he's climbing up the outside of the rocket towards this nose cone. Back on Heather, not seeing any of this.
It's my worst fear that whatever my mother had, I'll have. And I'll pass it along to...
Heather shakes her head and smiles, then looks up and gives it a start, seeing Dylan, who's climbed up to the pinnacle of the rocket and is standing fully upright on his nose cone. Way the hell up there, arms stretched to the heavens like a little idiot. Heather stands, afraid to move, and now several other parents, even kids, are seeing him, pointing as an angle past Dylan stretches up impossibly far, fingers stretched, straining. Heather far below, leaping off the bench and starting to run, angle up to Dylan as he stretches even harder, and then with a cry, loses his balance and falls. Heather running at top speed, Dylan falling through space. Heather barely making it to him. The boy and her meeting with a bone-jarring impact. Heather driven to the sand, hard with Dylan atop her. By the time Saxon gets to them, Heather's finding out that though she's dazed and bruised, amazingly, Dylan is not only okay, but serenely unconcerned with his close call. He simply looks up at her and says solemnly,
God wouldn't take me.
I don't want my face on this. Exterior Heather's house day, peaceful, sun-drenched. Never know anything going wrong. Heather, limping noticeably, fetches her mail. Interior din day. Heather wipes the sweat off of her face with her t-shirt and shuffles through the pile. There's a newspaper with headlines of the earthquake, the usual load of junk mail, and then something that stops her cold closer as she singles out one letter in particular, grimy, no address, smeared with soot. She opens it with shaking fingers, and we see a sheet of filthy paper holding a single out E pasted in its center. Heather stuffs the leather in a drawer. As she does, we glimpse dozens of other filthy envelopes. Heather crosses to the phone and dials.
Hello?
Robert?
Intercutting with interior Robert Englund's house, studio, day, tied on Englund, intense and quick, stalking back from the cordless phone's base through the living room of a large Mediterranean mansion. He talks as he walks and soon is back where he evidently was when the call came, and a sunroom off of the larger room, which features a large easel. Clearly an avid amateur painter, he's surrounded there by jars of brushes, rags, palettes. A large canvas, excuse me, he's working on is seen from behind.
Heather, are you doing okay?
Holding my own. You know that guy who was calling me all the time? He started again. He's been putting stuff in my mail.
Must have read about the funeral. Sick mother. It's the last thing you need right now, I'm sure.
It's actually giving me Freddy nightmares.
Line noise for a second, then
Freddy as in me?
Heather shakes her head.
It isn't you. He's scarier. He's
Robert puts down his brush. He takes a portable phone to the window and looks out as if he could see her.
Darker? More evil?
yeah. How'd you know?
Call it a guess.
He starts painting again, as if he saw something in the canvas he had to capture instantly or it would vanish. His face twists and flinches with the effort. We get that feeling. This is no mere hobby at all, but we still don't get to see the picture.
Anyway, what I was calling about was, have you seen any of the script by any chance?
Wes won't show it until it's finished. That's what he told me, at least. I asked him at the funeral.
When do you think it'll be done?
What he's writing is so weird. Who knows? I asked him how far I'd gotten at the funeral. And what was he said? Oh, yeah. As far as Dylan trying to reach God. Weird, huh? Did he have your kid in it?
Heather can't find her breath for a moment, fighting a perception of fear so stifling. It's like a pillow pressed to her face. She barely manages.
Robert, have you been having any nightmares?
Just the line noise on Robert painting. The phone held away from his head as if it contained something he doesn't want to acknowledge.
Robert, I think we should talk and not over the phone. Can I come over?
He shakes his head.
Actually, today's not good. There's something I've got to finish. How's tomorrow?
Back now with Heather, pale, turning to look at Dylan's door.
Tomorrow then, first thing in the morning. Meanwhile, take care, Robert, okay?
She hangs up. Robert hangs up too, just staring at the painting as if it held his salvation or his doom. Interior chase in Heather's bedroom night. Heather deep in sleep, tossing as if her bed were floating from a stormy sea. In fact, this time, very, very subtly, another earthquake has begun rocking the house. Lamps sway. The whole bed rises and falls as we move in on Heather. Interior dim night. Camera at the carpet level, just as two little feet pat into the frame. Move with them, tilting up into the cowboy's PJs to Dylan's face. Ghost light in the moonlight, eyes vacant, moving on through the living room as if a dream. Interior chase in Heather's bedroom night. Heather gasps out something in her sleep, the tone deeply distressed. I'm so sorry. Hands off of her across the sheet flung over her, the foot of the bed. There's movement there, the sheet raising and four salients pressed up from beneath. And then the glint of steel pokes through with a subtle rip, rip, rip. The claws of finely honed steel rise into the moonlight, moving past Heather's face to the claws, cleanly parting the sheet as they pull away closer to her. The only sound of a soft rip. As they stop and close up with a practiced snick cut that tatters between them, leaving only a single hole. And then the lethal steel hand rises fully into sight. Then there's a crash from somewhere downstairs, as if silverware drawer were dumped onto a tile floor. Heather jolts as if prodded with an electric wire, twists around and stares wide-eyed at nothing. Our wide angle from directly above shows twisted blankets. Nothing more. Chilled. Heather pulls the sheet around her, then pulls it back open, realizes it's cut into the ribbons along the entire length. She jumps out of bed, breath caught in her throat. Then there's a metallic scritch from the kitchen.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. 3, 4, better lock your door.
To her stairwell, 10, kitchen, night. Heather appears at the front door of the stairs, heart in her throat, 20 feet away, advancing slowly from kitchen. Dylan is chanting the old refrain.
5, 6, grab your crucifix.
Heather starts for him. Reverse angle past Dylan to Heather from his vantage point. We can see the cluster of steak knives he's taped to his fingers, making serious looking claws hidden behind his back. Heather shakes her head almost to him.
Sweetie, don't sing that.
No. Yes, please don't. She reaches for him and he strikes like lightning, slashing, barely missing. Advances again, breath coming a little asthmatic rasps. Heather blocks away. Or backs away.
7, 8, better stay up late.
She bangs up against a wall. He's too near for her to dodge away. They grapple the boy suddenly with the strength of a feral animal, raises the blades, hissing at her.
9, 10.
Heather lurches backwards as he strikes. Interior chase in Heather's bedroom. Dawn crash. She falls out of bed, now truly awake.
Never sleep again.
Pad, pad, pad. Interior den. Dawn. Heather enters limping, looks, sees her child circling in the center of the room before the lit TV, crying softly.
Never sleep again. Never sleep again.
And scattered all around him on the floor, filthy pages of letters.
Dylan?
Then she stops, staring more closely at the letters on the carpet. For the first time, she sees that using the single letter from each page, Dylan is spelled out. Answer the phone. Then the phone rings. Heather stares at Dylan, stunned. The phone rings again, and without even looking at it, or without even thinking about it, she picks it up.
Yes.
I touched him.
Jesus. Before she could react, the telephone suddenly thrusts a long, fleshy tongue, oh God, into her mouth, and an appallingly obscene lick. Oh God, she flails backwards, flinging it away. As she does, Dylan lets out a piercing scream and falls gasping on his side, legs kicking like an animal struck by a car. Heather grabs him and runs for the door. Interior hospital room day, eyes peering from behind the flare of light, closer still on Dylan's eyes, wide, unblinking. Dr. Hefner, a tall, powerful-looking woman in her 40s, is the chief of pediatric medicine. Clicks off the lights and and looks at Heather. Any history of epilepsy in your family?
No.
Diabetes?
No.
Was there any trigger event, a trauma, a shock, or you haven't shown him any of the films you make, have you? The horror stuff?
No.
Hefner nods, scowling. Good. I'm convinced they can tip an unstable child over the edge. Heather swallows, hardly able to find her voice.
Unstable? Dylan's not unstable. He's just upset.
The doctors look at her as if wondering if Heather's competent enough to handle the painful truth, and she just scrawls something on a prescription sheet. We'll run a battery of tests and we'll know in a few days. Heather looks at Dylan, eyes haunted by a terrible vulnerability. Dylan is stone silent. No evil behavior, just exhausted and withdrawn like some small creature escaped from a predator by the skin of his teeth. Now just following more core instincts, saying and hiding, do not make a sound.
Does he have to stay here overnight?
Absolutely. The doctor draws her out into the hallway outside the room. She holds Heather's eye and speaks low so Dylan can't hear. Anything more happen we should know about? Heather tenses slightly.
Like what?
Sometimes what a child says or fantasizes will give a clue to what ails him. Did he say anything while he was still lucid? Heather looks to Dylan. He's looking at her with trusting eyes.
No, Dylan didn't say anything.
She goes into the room. Dr. Hefner watches her carefully. A nurse walks by and Hefner hands her x-rays.
What have we here? Oh, I'm sorry.
It's too soon to know for sure, but the early symptoms point towards childhood schizophrenia. Interior Dylan's hospital room day. Tighter on Heather and Dylan. Heather has heard the above exchange. Near tears, she looks down at Dylan, curled against her eyes, opening but unseen, staring not so much at her as past her out the window.
Dylan, can you hear me?
Just barely, perceptibly. The terrified boy shakes his head. No.
Dylan, you've got to fight it, whatever it is that's after you. You've got to come back to me. You can't make it alone. Do you hear?
On Dylan, no response to this, but the single tear courses down his cheek, and then he nods, yes.
Yes. And if you can hear me, you can tell me what you need to feel safe.
He says nothing, but then Heather is aware of movement. She looks down and sees Dylan's hands moving under the covers, reaching down towards the bottom of the bed for something that clearly is not there.
Rex, is that what you want? Rex is home, Dylan. That's where you should be too. You've got to get better so they'll let you come home. Understand?
Home.
Home. That's right.
She points out the window.
That's where I want you, Dylan. You know we're not that far. Right out there past the freeway is our home. But to get there, you've got to come out from wherever you are. Then they'll let you come back home to Rex and to me.
She kisses him gently on his forehead, crying herself now. Then a nurse enters with a paper cup.
Time for your medicine, cowboy.
Dylan looks at it solemnly.
What is that?
Just something to help him sleep.
Heather looks at Dylan and nods. Then, as if he were 1,000 years old, Dylan puts it in his mouth. The nurse gives him water and he swallows.
Attaboy. Now take a little nap. You'll have to leave now. He'll be fine. We'll run tests tonight. You can visit again in the morning.
The nurse leaves. Heather turns to Dylan.
Okay, Dylan. I'll be back here first thing tomorrow. I love you.
Heather kisses him again, gives a little wave, and leaves. Dylan closes his eyes, but when Heather disappears through the doorway behind, he brings his hand to his mouth and spits the sleeping pill into his palm. A moment later, he's hidden it deep in his bed covers. His eyes are wide open, staring out the window again to his home over there. So near, yet so far away. Exterior hospital parking lot day. Heather in her Volvo starts to back out, lost in thought. Instantly, there's a blare of a horn and curses from the car she's almost backed into. Heather pulls back into the parking space and kills the engine. She just sits there and sobs. For one moment, all the confusion and dread surging out of her. Then she forces herself to breathe. Excuse me. Swipes away the tears, swears to herself, and starts the engine. Interior, exterior, Heather's Volvo day. Heather drives and drinks a 7-Eleven coffee. She's got the radio on loud to fight drooping eyes.
Seismologist at Caltech have counted over 300 of the tremblers so far. Though most were too faint for us to feel, 7 have shaken our community in the last 2 weeks, and now scientists are speculating there might be an unknown fault running beneath Los Angeles. A fault that could...
Heather turns it off, thinks a moment, then punches numbers into the car phone and listens to it cycle and ring. Somebody picks up immediately.
Robert?
This is Heather, PAtrice. I was calling for Robert. He's not there?
Interior, Robert Englund's house stay. PAtrice, Robert's wife, 33, a face of great strength and beauty, looking a bit dazed and edgy right now, moves through the living room with a suitcase. She puts it down with 2 others and then starts for the studio.
He's out of the house, Heather.
Will he be back anytime soon?
Actually, we're ducking out of town for a while.
On Heather, sensing the woman's near panic.
And you should get away too, Heather. You really should.
Okay. Cutting back to England's, PAtrice is stopped in the middle of the studio to grab Robert's glasses. She stuffs them into a pocket, turns and looks off.
Just a little break away from LA.
Cut to what she's looking at. The impressionistic painting Englund was working on, a large, frightening portrait of Freddy himself, a being far more dark and ominous than the usual version, the one we and Heather glimpsed in Chase's coffin, as different in kind as the film as Batman was from the TV version. He's larger, quick, and feral, and yet at the same time imbued with the enormous strength and intelligence, a truly primal threat from the lowest ring of hell, and the large, gleaming steel hand of claws, cocked and ready to strike, grow right out of the end of his arm.
We could all use a break about now, don't you think?
Back on Heather's, and line goes dead. Exterior West's house day. A modern home high above Malibu. Pan across a pool to a patio where we dissolve to West and Heather walking together.
I wish I could tell you where this script is going. I don't know. Look, I dream a scene, I write it down the next morning. Your guess is as good as mine as to how it ends.
He ducks inside, Heather running to catch up. Interior West's house day.
At least tell me what it's about so far.
Wes stops as his housekeeper emerges from the kitchen with a steaming cup of coffee. Heather drinks immediately despite the scalding heat. When the housekeeper disappears, Craven continues.
I can tell you what the nightmares are about. They're about this entity, whatever you want to call it. It's old, very old, and it's taken forms in different times. The only thing that stays the same is what it lives for.
What's that?
Killing innocents, one way or another.
She notices the haunted eyes.
This is still a script we're talking about, right?
I think of it sort of as a nightmare in progress.
She looks at him. He stares back, revealing nothing.
Then, in this nightmare in progress, does this thing have any weaknesses?
It can be captured sometimes.
Captured how?
By storytellers of all things. Every so often, they imagine a good story good enough to catch its essence. Then it's held prisoner for a while in the story.
She looks at him.
Like the genie in a bottle?
Exactly. The problem comes when the story dies. It happens a lot of different ways. The story gets too familiar or too watered down by people trying to make it easier to sell, or ties labeled a threat to society and just plain banned. However, it happens when the story dies. The evil is set free.
Heather blinks as it hits her.
You're saying Freddy's this ancient thing?
Current version. For 10 years, he's been imprisoned as Freddy by the story of Nightmare on Elm Street. But now that the films have stopped, the genie's out of the bottle, Heather. That's what the nightmares are about. That's what I'm writing.
She looks at him, fear creeping up her spine.
If Freddy's loose, I mean, in your script, where is he gonna go? Another age? Another form?
That's not what the dreams say he's doing.
Then what is he doing?
Well, he's gotten used to being Freddy now, and it kind of likes it here. In our time and space, too. So he's trying to cross over from film into our reality.
Heather looks like she might pass out.
Isn't there anyone that can stop him?
Interestingly enough, in the dreams, there is one person, a gatekeeper, so to speak. Someone Freddy's got to get by before he can enter our world. It's you, Heather.
Me? Why me?
Dramatically speaking, it makes perfect sense. You played Nancy, after all, the first to humiliate and defeat him.
It was Nancy, not me.
But it was you that gave Nancy her strength. So to get out, he has to come through you, and it's inevitable that he'll hit you at your most valuable points.
Heather pales.
Oh, Dylan. Chase. My God, Wes, did you know?
Heather, it's just a movie, a dream, really.
You know damn well it's more than that now. How can we stop him?
He stops in the doorway to his studio. Heather sees this room is draped against the light. It's in its center glows a computer, half-finished page on his script on its screen. Next to the computer, a narrow cot, its sheets twisted.
The way to stop him is to make another movie. And I swear to you, I'll stay at my computer and keep writing until I finish the script. But when that time comes, you're going to have to make a choice.
Choice? What kind of choice?
Whether or not you're willing to play Nancy one last time.
Fade to black. Fade up on interior chase in Heather's bedroom night. Heather studies long into the night, a host of books spread around her, yellow pads for notes, and she's brought the coffee maker right into the bedroom now. It sits prominently on her bedside table. 12:30 a.m. Close up pan of books. Chilton on childhood diseases, Barton and O'Neill's texts on pediatric schizophrenia, Xeroxes from Scientific American, a Journal of AMA, a Lancelet, Journal of American Psychological Institute. Close up on her fingers, tracing complex paragraphs, extreme close up of textual fragments.
Incipience of aphasia, commonly preceded by periods of acute irritability, delusional accounts of shadow figures, hearing of voices, seizures, nausea, and emesis.
Intercut with close-up of Heather's eyes, reading, reacting subtly as the fear and awful doubts mount. Then she loses her grip momentarily on the book, and several pages turn. She tries to find her place, then straightens. Extreme close-up of new text under a heading of sleep disorders in the words, many of the symptoms of schizophrenia are duplicated in children suffering from sleep deprivation. Extreme close-up of the words, sleep deprivation. Close-up of her hand reaching out of her cup for her cup of coffee, stopping inches from the cup. Extreme close-up of Heather's eyes shifting to the cup, extreme close up of the coffee, the black surface of the coffee radiating concentric greens, subtle at first, then larger and larger until fluid is sloshing over the brim. Is a T-Rex coming? Heather goes rigid, braces, looking around. There's a distinct low rumble building now with a responding creaking complaint from the timbers of the house. Then the TV in her room blinks on, at first silently, so that she's not even sure she's heard the subtle blink. Then the volume comes up and she finds herself watching a news story on the day's earthquake. Footage, stock of brick walls atop smashed cars, freeway overpasses, and cracked and closed off.
A 6-point quake on the Richter scale, bringing scattered destruction throughout the LA basin.
Heather fumbles for the drawer on her bedside table and finds the remote, aims and fires, and the TV blinks off a beat and then blinks back on. Heather just stares at it. What's going on here? She's about to beat it off again, and then she stops. The story is segueing to
the world of horror film suffered its own terror today as 2 of Hollywood's best-known special effects technicians were found dead in a vacant field.
TV switches to a late-night newscaster with the superimposed logo of Freddy's claw and the text, real-life horror.
Terrence Feinstein and Charles Wilson, 2 special effects artists reputedly working on a top-secret project for the makers of the Freddy Krueger films, were found brutally slashed to death early this evening.
Jesus. Heather bleeps it off. And the TV stays back. She breathes a sigh of relief, badly shaken, then it comes back on.
Freddy's glove was missing. Police are speculating whether the murders were the result of a botched theft of...
The picture contorts and then grows into snow and dies. There's an interior bluish flare inside the TV and a wisp of smoke, then silence. And the phone rings. Heather just stares at it. It rings again. Then her answering machine picks up downstairs.
Heather, this is Sara. Sorry to call so late, but this is kind of hard. I don't know if you've seen the news, but we're just thinking we might shelf this new nightmare project for just a little while and wanted you to know. Okay, call, bye.
Click. Heather leans back against her pillows, closes her eye, and now takes her eyes and now takes a deep breath. Just the sound of the wind now. Her head falls slowly and sideways. Then the first plate falls in the kitchen, then another, a sharp, harrowing crashing of crockery. And Heather dives out of bed, stumbling for the doorway as the full force of the earthquake hits. Kablam! Heather braces in the doorway, gritting her teeth as things throughout the house topple now. Something big in the living room, both lamps off the bedside tables. This is the worst quake yet. And then the lights go out. Heather lets out a cry of terror and adrenaline. At last, it's over. A moment's silence, then one final crash. Glass from the sound of it. The utter preternatural silence. I can never say that word right. Preternatural silence. Heather holds, waiting for the aftershock, and then there is none. And then she starts to wonder about that last crash. There's enough moonlight to tell the direction of it. The closet. She looks. The rest she can guess, but what the hell was in the closet? She crosses and opens the door, looking down to see the broken remains of her coffee pot. She looks back to her bedside table. The coffee pot is gone. The mirror sounds, brings her head around, and she finds herself looking to the face, not 10 inches from her own, a dark, scarred figure, face contorted with a menace and eyes catching scant light, just enough to glint incredible hatred and energy. Heather lets out the scream at the same second he strikes, lunging forward and driving her backwards over the bed, landing atop and pressing his ugly face right into hers. Now there's enough of the moonlight to glimpse the pocked and crisped skull.
Let's see.
Extreme close-up 2-shot, and he drives down hard, but as he does, the bed suddenly twists over at the same instant and the aftershock hits. Heather is thrown to the side at the last possible second, the blade slashing past her throat and hitting her up thrust arm. A split second before she careens out of bed entirely, hitting the floor hard, knocking herself out cold as the quake/rumbles shake room, then fall away, close on Heather on the deck, shaking herself back into consciousness, looking around in shock. The room is normal, only her bed seems affected, so askew. Half the mattress touches the floor. She raises herself painfully. Her bedside clock radio is blinking. 12, 12. She realizes she's clutching her arm and there's blood oozing between her fingers. Then she remembers.
Dylan.
Interior hospital corridor night. Karen Levine, handheld with Heather as she runs down the corridor towards Dylan's room. Then she sees Julie staring back at her, stopped by a nurse.
Julie, what are you doing here?
Julie
Not being a nurse
shrug.
right now. I don't know. I just had this terrible dream that Dylan was in danger. I had to come over and see. You must think I'm crazy.
Heather shakes her head.
No, I don't think that at all. How is he?
They wouldn't let me see him.
Excuse me. At that moment, Dr. Hefner strides into sight. She looks at Heather with a slightly pained smile. Mrs. Langenkamp, I'm afraid there are no evening visitor hours in intensive care.
Is he all right?
Dylan? He's holding well. Earlier, he had some problems. He's in an oxygen tent just now.
Oh my God.
She goes to pass, but the doctor stops her, looking down at her sleeve. It seems you've had an accident, Mrs. Langenkamp. May I? Heather looks down. She's forgotten entirely about her bloodied arm. The doctor lifts the sleeve and sees 4 slashes across the forearm. Oh, those are nasty cuts. How?
It happened during the earthquake. I fell. I want to see Dylan.
But the doctor doesn't move out of the way. She looks from the cuts to Heather's face, seeing fear and stress. In a moment. First, let's see about you. She takes Heather's elbow. Heather glances towards Julie, then goes with her to the dispensary. Heather sits while the doctor treats the cuts. Heather's obviously uneasy and wishing to be with her son, but the doctor isn't taking the cuts lightly and is increasingly alert to Heather's highly agitated state. If these had been a few inches near the wrist, what did you say you cut yourself on?
It was an earthquake and it was dark. I have no idea.
These look quite fresh.
They are. It happened in tonight's quake. It happened just 15 minutes ago. You must have felt it.
The doctor has no idea what she's talking about. I guess we lucked out over here. Heather swallows. The doctor begins bandaging. Your son apparently is terrified of a man, someone he thinks is going to come out of his bed. One of the nurses heard him talking in his sleep. You have any idea who that man might be, Mrs. Langenkamp? Heather winces. The woman binds the gauze with a clip.
I meant to bring him his dinosaur, Rex. Rex keeps Freddy from...
Heather realizes what she said, but it's too late. The man from your films? Freddy Krueger with the claws? Is that who he's afraid of? You've let your child see your films, haven't you? Heather turns and faces the woman, furious.
Every kid knows about Freddy. He's like Santa Claus or King Kong.
Dr. Hefner just eyes her too appalled to take it further. I see. Well, interesting talking to you, Mrs. Langenkamp. I hope you understand my concerns are simply for the welfare of your son. She smiles thinly and leaves the room. Interior Dylan's hospital room night. Dylan, now visible only through the plastic of an oxygen tent. Heather sits next to her son's bed, exhausted, just watching his slow breathing, trying to piece it all together. The nurse glances to Heather and exchanges a whispered word with the second nurse. Heather, despite her best efforts, is nodding. Suddenly, there's a shrill alarm from a monitor and Dylan twists sharply inside his tent, suffering what looks like a full cardiac arrest. Arched across the bed, fingers crawling through the air in silent agony. Heather jerks away as several nurses rush in, looks back in to see Dylan, and sees he's half sitting up now. His eyes are open, peering back at her with incredible intensity as he unzips the oxygen tent. It stops her short. She leans closer.
Dylan, honey, you shouldn't do that.
Dylan's face twists slowly into an uncanny imitation of an old man, and the voice that comes out of his child's mouth is absolutely recognizable. Absolutely Freddy Krueger's.
Too late. I'm almost there, Heather. I'm almost there.
Okay. And with that, Dylan vomits a huge involuntary convulsion that sends green-black effluvia straight into her eyes. Ooh, gross. Heather lurches back, clawing at the stinging globs clinging to her face and her hair. We glimpse insects, worms, oh god, and worse. Quick cuts, emergency machinery flying in. Heather's pushed back, nurses scurrying, the sound of Dylan crying in a daze for his mother. Then Dr. Hefner strides in and roughly shoves the nurses away.
Doctor.
Get her back. I've got to go in. Get me full anesthetic. Stat.
We don't have any here, doctor.
The doctor, grim face and furious, wheels back into Dylan, clawing oxygen tent away. Screw it then. I'm going in. She rips the terrified child's gown away from his chest. Cut this evil out of him. And with that, she pulls her hand out of her shrapnel sharp claws, and Dr. Hefner raises them to plunge into the child. Heather lurches forward.
No.
Still in the room, the crazed Dr. Hefner is not there, but Heather is dived right into Dylan's bed. Now, several nurses struggle to subdue her. Heather fights one last second, then realizes what happens.
Now, what have you done to yourself, miss?
Heather looks down and sees the blood seeping out from under the bandage on her arm. Then she looks back. Dylan's bed, the oxygen tent shredded, and Dylan is gone. Heather loses it.
He's got him. He's got my Dylan.
The nurses wheel and stare at her, wild, trembling, and now with a stark streak of gray slashed through her auburn hair. Did somebody say who's got him? Who's got him? I don't know. Heather seeks the look of people clearly thinking she's nuts, but she doesn't give a shit. She realizes now what's happened to the brief moment she was asleep.
Freddy.
Freddy? Who, Freddy Krueger or something?
Just at that point, the real Dr. Hefner comes in, takes in the situation in an instant, and asks,
My baby. Freddy's got my baby. He's got my Dylan.
The doctor seizes Heather roughly by the arms and shakes her until she looks at him. Mrs. Langenkamp, I suggest you go home and get some rest. Your son is fine. He's been taken downstairs for further testing.
He was just here.
He was here. You fell asleep. We took him. You looked so exhausted. Frankly, we didn't want to wake you. Besides, the young woman, Julie, is with him. Believe me, everything is fine.
Everything is not fine.
And she bolts out of the room. Hefner swears under her breath and snaps to a nurse. Call security. Interior testing area corridor, moving with Heather handheld. A woman in mid-argument with several nurses as she charges down the corridor.
Where is he?
This is a restricted area. Do you have a pass?
The nurse tries to grab Heather. Heather shoves her away with a warning look.
Screw your pass.
Just then, Dr. Hefner catches up. It's all right now, Mrs. Langenkamp. Just remain calm. Tell us how our boy is doing. The nurse flicks a look at Heather.
He's fine, actually. He came out of coma 10 minutes ago. It's looking like acute sleep deprivation. I don't think she ever lets the kid get a night's sleep.
Munchausen syndrome? Heather pushes over.
What are you saying? Where is he?
The door behind them opens and the two security guards appear. Hefner stops them with a hand signal, hearing.
Over here, Heather.
Heather turns to see Julie motioning from a door, beaming.
Got someone here who wants to see you.
Interior testing room doorway. Heather runs into the testing room. Dylan's wide awake on the small examination table. And the moment he sees Heather, he holds out his arms close on them as they embrace, both speaking in whispers, affording themselves the only privacy they can.
You okay, champ?
Can we go get Rex now? The Batman's getting awful close.
I know he is, sweetie. We'll both go get Rex right now.
She starts to pick up Dylan, then stops. Dylan's looking over her shoulder. She turns to see Dr. Hefner. I'm afraid Dylan really should stay with us until we know what's causing these episodes, Mrs. Langenkamp. I'm sure you understand. Heather looks back to Dylan and motions for Julie to come in close with them.
Tell you what, I'm going to go get Rex for you right now. You know home isn't far from here, right?
Right across the freeway.
That's right. So I won't be long. Meanwhile, Julie's going to be right here with you.
You bet.
Julie takes his hand. Dylan seems to take comfort in that, but still he leans closer to Heather and begs.
Hurry back, please. I'm getting sleepy.
Promise. Cross my heart. But until Mommy gets back, Dylan, whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
She turns to Julie.
Don't let him out of your sight, Julie, and keep him awake.
Julie, thank God, accepts this at face value.
I'll stick to him like glue, Heather. Swear to God.
Interior testing room doorway. Heather comes out and starts for the exit, but she doesn't get more than a few steps before the two security guards come out of nowhere and take her by each elbow.
Hey!
Before she knows it, Heather is hustled in the same dispensary where Dr. Hefner patched her up earlier, and the good doctor waits now. Interior treatment room continuous. Heather is pressed into a chair by two guards.
Do you mind?
Just a quick word, Mrs. Langenkamp, for Dylan's sake. The security men post themselves at the door. Dr. Hefner exchanges a glance with the nurses as they vanish from the room. Heather has no choice right now. Well, it's been an exciting few days for you, hasn't it, Mrs. Langenkamp?
If you don't mind, I've got something more important to do than make small talk.
She starts to rise, but the doctor presses her back down with a look and means business. Why don't you please be patient? All of this is just routine. Interior testing room. Julie and Dylan look up to see in the testing room doorway the two nurses enter. Interior testing room.
Uh-oh.
Julie stands. One nurse goes directly to the cabinet and begins rummaging inside. The second walks past Julie to stand by Dylan. Julie, instantly alert, crosses to the nurse of the cabinet as the woman pulls out a very large needle and vial.
Would you mind stepping outside for just a moment, miss?
Abso-fucking-lutely not. As a matter of fact, I would mind. What do you think you're doing?
The nurse has already, excuse me, filled the syringe and now squirts out the air bubble.
Just a little shot to see that he gets.
No way. His mother specifically said not to fucking fall asleep.
The nurse moves for Dylan. Julie grabs her. The nurse just stops and looks at her with a strange smirk of a smile.
Do it.
Ow!
Julie spins around. The second nurse is just withdrawing a needle of her own from Dylan's arm, having caught both of them off guard.
Hold on.
Dylan lets out a little wail of despair.
Be asleep in no time. Mind letting go of my arm?
Bitch!
She brings around a left hook that sends the nurse reeling backwards into your testing room doorway and out the door. The woman lands flat on her back in the hallway. In the testing room, Julie stares in shock, hardly believing she's done that, as the second nurse rears up behind her.
Hey, you can't do that.
Julie grabs a large syringe dropped by the KO'd nurse and levels it at the other. The nurse number 2 holds her own for a moment, the two facing each other, needle to needle.
I know what's in that one. Do you know what's in this one? Huh. Or what it'll do when I stick you with it, and I will.
She faints. Nurse number 2 drops her syringe like a hot potato. An interior testing room doorway, runs out of the room. Julie slams the door and locks it. Then she runs into Dylan.
Dylan, don't fall asleep. Dylan!
Back in the treatment room, Dr. Hefner pulls up a stool and sits directly before Heather, leaning in closer still. Mrs. Langenkamp, has there been any use of recreational drugs in your family or any history of mental disturbance? Heather's eyes flashed with barely suppressed rage.
The hell are you asking?
The woman raises her hands and practices a non-threatening gesture. Please don't take this wrong, but there's a good chance Dylan could be suffering from something passed down to him. Have you been suffering from any delusional events, Mrs. Langenkamp? Heather starts to stand again, but this time the security guards push her back down. Heather looks back to Dr. Hefner, a cold snake of fear now coiling in her spine. This man from your films, Freddy Krueger. Have you been seeing him?
No.
Heather looks down, the bandage on her arm is seeping blood. She looks back to Hefner, a flick of desperation in her eyes. There are drugs and treatments, Mrs. Langenkamp. We could place Dylan in a foster care for a short while. Run some tests on you. Heather cuts Hefner off with a deadly cold wave of her hand, gets up, bumps against the guards.
I want my kid out of here now.
Very well, as soon as we gather the appropriate papers.
You don't understand. If Dylan falls asleep, then...
Heather turns and an off-screen sound, interior testing room, pounding on the door from the nurses outside. Julie is shaking Dylan as hard as she can without hurting him. But despite all of this, the injection is having its way. Dylan is sagging before her very eyes, eyelids fluttering, words slurring.
Where's mommy? Where's...
Then his head lulls into his shoulders, close on his eye, closing. The opening just a crack, seeing something big and dark and awful. Rising behind Julie, something with long, vicious claws at the ends of gleaming steel fingers.
Julie! Behind you!
She turns, there's nothing there for her to see, but Dylan sees the claws rise over Julie and they fall into her like the scythe from the Grim Reaper himself. Our POV, Julie lets out a scream and is hauled up into midair by an invisible but horrible force, just as interior testing room doorway. The door behind bursts open, two nurses barge in, then freeze scene. A screaming, writhing Julie lifted into the air by an invisible hands and they flung to the floor. Next moment, she's being dragged bloodily up the wall, leaving scarlet trail of life's blood. Dylan jerks suddenly up to an ambulatory sleep, eyes glazed, face rigid and pale. And Julie smashes into the floor behind him. The nurses scream in terror as they could never in a million years imagine. And Dylan runs out of the room and is gone. Interior treatment room continuous. Heather, as the security guards react to the screams and race from the room, gives one look to Dr. Hefner. The woman is frozen in fear. She turns and bolts from the room. Back in the corner, Heather races by the camera as a nurse running from Julie's room stops the security guards. Forget it. Nothing you can do there. Call the cops now. The guards tear off in another direction. Heather races down to the testing room and looks inside. Heather's POV, blood everywhere, but no Dylan. Back in the corridor, she turns to nurse number 2.
My son. Did you see my son?
I thought he was here.
And then Dr. Hefner's there, not seen yet into the room. No way he's going anywhere. He's been well sedated.
He doesn't have to be awake to be on his feet.
What?
He sleepwalks, you idiot. He's fully capable of walking out of this hospital. Oh my God, he thinks I've gone home.
Without another word, she turns and runs out. Exterior hospital parking lot. Night. Heather's Volvo roars down the ramp and onto the street, narrowly missing a collision, screaming off into the night. Heather's Volvo. Heather drives as fast as she can, scans the streets while she's punching up a number on her car phone. It rings and is picked up by a sleepy...
John Saxon, do you have any idea what time it is?
John, it's Heather. I need help.
You got it. What's happening?
Dylan's run away from the hospital. I don't know whether he's wandering around or heading to the house, but I think Freddy's after him. I know it sounds crazy.
You're right. That sounds crazy.
John, will you please just go look for him around the hospital? I'm gonna go right to the house. Will you help me, John? Please.
I'm on my way.
Then.
I'm on my way. You go home, Heather. That's a smart thing to do. I'll call you there.
Now Heather is crying.
Thank you, John. I'll never forget.
She doesn't get anything else. She sees something so chilling through her windshield. She just slams on the brakes and stares in disbelief. Interior, exterior, Heather's Volvo. Volvo. We zoom across the street into an embankment, up the embankment to the tiny figure up there in cowboy pajamas, doggedly clawing his way up through the weeds and cresting the hill. There, now lit by a flare of 1,000 headlights, is Dylan staring across either lanes of the high-speed traffic, trying to see his home. Exterior street embankment night. Heather leaps out of the car and screams at the top of her lungs.
Dylan!
Angled with Dylan on the edge of the freeway, traffic roaring by and wind rippling through his hair. Somehow, in all of this din, he still hears his mother and turns, seeing her running across the street, starting up the steep embankment after him.
Dylan, stay right there.
But then he looks up and reacts, and as POV, we see the night sky, a giant peak of clouds moving, twisting, changing into a huge, dark figure in a wide-brimmed hat peering out from behind the clouds, and a frightening silhouette. It looks down on him with glowing, leering eyes, and then huge steel claws poke through the very fabric of the night, rendering it asunder as the light of the full moon catches their wicked curves. Without another choice, Dylan turns and runs into traffic. Instantly, there's a blare of air horns, and a semi-tractor trailer is screaming down on him. Momentarily blinded by its headlights, Dylan barely manages to dance sideways enough, and the truck misses him by inches, but this puts Dylan directly in the path of a speeding car coming up the next lane. He freezes, the car swerves and screams around him. So close, his clothes are ruffled by the wind. Back on Heather, hearing the brakes and horns, she convulses in horror and lets out a scream of her own, then redoubles her efforts, clawing her way over the fence and up the hill. With Dylan staggering for the median strip, 3 howling lanes away, with Heather topping the embankment and her POV, seeing the horror of her son, missed and missed again by inches, unable to cross the last 2 lanes. Cutting with Dylan, his huge clawed hands stabs into frame, plucking him up and swinging him with merciless sport in and out of the path of oncoming cars. Back to Heather, about to start after him, then to her amazement, seeing Dylan, no claw visible whatsoever, just lifting into the air against all the laws of physics, nearly dashed into oblivion time and time again.
Freddy, you bastard, take me.
And she runs straight for him. The tanker truck slams on all brakes, hews sideways. Heather sees it coming, turns and runs for her life, but it's coming too fast. She dives and tucks and looks up just in time to see the whole massive tanker sweep right over her head. Cars are slewing on every which way, but she stumbles back up and presses on, her terror surpassed only by her utter resolve to get to Dylan. The blade of the claw cuts near through his PJs. He drops hard and jumps up and darts through a gap in the median fence. Heather leaps for her life as the station wagon blurs past her without even seeing her, as she looks up to see the second car, brakes smoking and screaming, coming right at her. She's too paralyzed by fear to move, and the car hits her just before it stops, knocking her flying. A moment later, the freeway on her side grinds to a halt. Already, people are out of their cars and running to her aid, but on the other side of the median strip, the brakes are still screaming, with Dylan looking back to his mother's side. Seeing dozens and dozens of Freddys suddenly, peering at him over the brink of the median wall. Dylan turns and runs, somehow by absolute miracle makes it to the far side, plunging down the embankment. With Heather dazed, but fighting her way up, she pulls away from the helping arms and staggers after her son. Heather's exterior, Heather's street night. Heather stumbles and limps down the street, bloodied and bruised, but not moving. She stops in front of her house. The door is open and she runs in. Interior kitchen den.
Dylan.
She listens, hears something, and then sees the shadow of a man ease out of the dark kitchen. She gives a scream and shrinks back. Then she sees it's John Saxon.
Holy!
Where's Dylan? Have you seen him?
Saxon tries to soothe her.
Relax, Nancy, relax.
He points. Heather, not knowing what the hell's going on with him, is using Nancy's name, turns and looks. Dylan, toddling out of his room, holding his guard dinosaur Rex. The child's eyes are still glazed and he's definitely not awake, but he's singing softly. Dylan, oh, sorry.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Freddy's coming for you.
Heather races over and hugs him so hard, Saxon's afraid she'll hurt the kid.
What in the world happened?
Heather just hugs Dylan, trying not to cry.
You know how Chase really died.
What are you talking about?
Fred Krueger did it.
Yeah, sure.
Heather looks at Dylan.
You saw him, didn't you, Dylan?
Coming for you.
Saxon gently pulls Heather away.
Hey, come on inside a minute. I need to talk to you.
He pulls her up and marches her towards the front door.
Dylan.
Dylan, sucking his thumb now, is turned to stare back at his bedroom, apparently not hearing her.
Jesus, what the hell's going on, Nancy?
Heather looks at him dazed. Saxon pulls her outside and closes the door. Heather's front yard. Something is different. Heather registers it subconsciously the moment that they're through the door, but she's too focused on Saxon's strange misnomer for her.
John, why are you calling me Nancy?
Saxon looks at her.
Why are you calling me John?
She glances back at the house, trying to see Dylan. She can't, but she looks back at Saxon and reacts in shock. He's staring back at her from the front of an unmarked police car, and it's a magnetic dome light flashing. Those of us with a good memory might realize that it's the identical car that Lieutenant Thompson drove in Nightmare 1. And even more mind-boggling, he's now dressed in the wardrobe of Lieutenant Thompson from the same film.
Nancy, you've got to get hold of yourself before you make both yourself and that kid nuts.
Heather weaves slightly, not knowing what kind of sick joke this is, but determined to wrestle it back into reality she can deal with.
John, would you call Robert?
He stares at her.
Robert?
Robert Englund, you know, the actor who plays Freddy.
Saxon Lieutenant Thompson grows instantly guarded.
Freddy who?
You know who? Freddy Krueger?
Saxon Lieutenant Thompson colors, then struggling to keep his voice controlled.
Freddy's dead, Nancy. Now don't lose it like your mother.
Heather steps back, stung. Saxon Lieutenant Thompson instantly regrets having said that, comes back and hugs Heather fiercely.
I love you, sweetheart. Don't ever forget that.
He turns and gets in the car.
I love you too, Daddy.
Tears spring into her eyes, and for some reason she gives a deep shudder as we enter Dylan's room night. Dylan's bed, as something starts to rise from under its blankets, something big and powerful, rising to a full man's height and still coming. And then the claws are poking through, breaking out, and we see Freddy, hulking, dark silhouette of pure evil. Exterior outside Elm Street house night goes in on Saxon, Lieutenant Thompson, and Heather. As Saxon, I think that's supposed to say Heather Nancy, Saxon is leaning out of the car.
Now get yourself some rest, Nancy. Please.
He starts the engine and siren, then the dome lights. He roars away. Heather stares after him in the shock of a moment, and then realizes that everything is different. This isn't her front yard at all. Even her wardrobe has changed. She's now wearing the same pajamas she wore in our opening boiler room nightmare. She feels the same cold chill up her spine and turns around and looks at her house, the house on Elm Street, and stares back at her. Its windows barred, its front door swinging open in the wind. Then she hears her child scream.
Dylan.
She races inside, and the iron reinforced door slams shut behind her. Interior Heather's house night. Interestingly, she's still Heather's house inside. She shakes herself to make sure she's not dreaming.
Dylan?
No answer. She crosses to the kitchen and picks up the largest kitchen knife she can find. Then she becomes aware of the television set. She racks in shock. Her POV of the TV screen, Nancy and Lieutenant Thompson, Heather and John Saxon mid-dialogue from the final moments of Nightmare 1. And what they say on screen matches exactly what they've just said in the previous scene.
Freddy Krueger did it, Daddy.
Yeah, sure.
Transformation is complete. Interior Heather's house night. She notices something on the floor. She stops and picks it up.
Dylan's sleeping pills?
She looks again. There's another. And farther on, another. A trail leading towards Dylan's room. Oh, this is still me. The interior Dylan's room night. Heather enters by Freddy, turning on the light and picking up another capsule. Then she notices two things: the disemboweled remains of Rex flung on the floor near the foot of the bed, and then still another pill on the blanket near the pillows. She picks the pill up, then on impulse lifts the blanket and looks under. Two more pills on in the middle, one in the far down towards the bottom. She pulls the blanket all the way back. Nothing but bed, then floor. Then Heather realizes.
He's given me the only way I can join him.
She closes her eyes and takes the pills, all of them, and swallows, turns back to the bed, lifts the cover again. In her POV under the covers, there's another pill there now. So far down, she has to get under the blanket to reach it. She tucks the knife in her belt and crawls under the blankets. Heather picks up the capsule, starts to squiggle back out, then again on impulse lifts the blankets at the very bottom of the bed, interior trick bed chute, and this time instead of the edge of the mattress and the floor beyond, excuse me, only more sheet is revealed, going on another 5-6 feet and sloping downwards. And down there near the place where the sheet and the blanket come together is another pill. Heather starts down for it. With her down there, now completely within the softly glowing tent of the blanket, pitched downward awkwardly, she picks up the pill and takes it, and the other. And just has to lift the blanket and check if there's no one. What is revealed is the steep slope of a sheet dropping away sharply into what could be infinity. It goes so far. Heather draws back, intimidated, yawns, and starts to crawl back out, then hears the voice from down there. Mommy! And then the unmistakable laughter of Freddy. Heather closes her eyes and dives forward without hesitation, moving with her, a wild half over her shoulder, half POV shots, plunging down a well of bedding into darkness, and then ruddy light, wet stone walls shooting by at great speed. Then an ancient stone facade. Heather flies out of the stone flume and in this well amid coursing water, pitching out into thin air and out of frame. Interior Freddy's boiler room, up angled to a toothed rectangle in an ancient ceiling. Above is darkness, out of which falls Heather/Nancy. She plunges down into the deep, fetid water of some horrendous catch of basin. She surfaces, gasping, half drowned, looking around. She finds herself lit in hellish hues by flames licking through the monumental wall of a furnace behind her. Galleries of stone and vistas of the city of night stretch out in all directions. The heavy drivel of a condensed steam is everywhere, and there's a palpable feeling of evil.
Dylan?
Her only answer is the horrific sound of steel nails scratching along steel, a sound 1,000 times worse than fingernails on a chalkboard. She reaches under the red water, coming up with the butcher knife. The turns and splashes towards the sound. She searches the vast room, then stops, hearing the faintest.
Mommy?
She races across the chamber towards the wall of the flame, and there, at its base, is Dylan, crouched alone in front of a huge furnace, backlit by the angry flames, and he's holding something, a sheaf of papers, and the whole dimension falls quiet as he holds it out to her. Heather starts for him and then warily stops, alert for a trap.
Dylan, where's the man?
Yeah.
She splashes to him, drops the knife on a sill of a furnace, and takes him in her arms, close on the two. A long, tender embrace as Heather looks at his face. He seems all right, and then she looks at the papers in his hand.
What is that?
The story.
Heather finds herself seized by the strangest compulsion to look. Despite where she is, she opens a page towards the back at random, and she smiles grimly.
Yes, it's a story. Story for a movie.
Read me some.
Heather just shakes her head, incredulous at the eerie accuracy of the writing.
At last his mother finds him. She gives him a long, happy hug, and then she looks at the pages. Story? The little boy asks. Yes, says his mother. A story of us. And the mother takes the book and begins to read. And as she begins to read, from behind her, there comes.
She stiffens, realizing, twists around at the same split second he strikes. The true Freddy, huge and dark and incredibly fast, slamming her into her and lifting her up with his clawed hands, snatching away the script and flinging it into the fire.
It's your maker.
He lifts his arms to strike and then lets out the most god-awful scream imaginable. Excuse me. Low angle on Dylan down there on the deck with the big knife jammed into the back of Freddy's right knee. Freddy goes down like a fallen sequoia, clawing for the child. Dylan springs backward, barely out of reach of the monster, and Heather leaps into the monster's back, pulling him off, and Dylan is free.
Run, Dylan!
And run he does. Freddy twists Heather around and flings her across the room into a stone pillar. Heather hits hard and doesn't move. Freddy turns and sees Dylan dodging through an archway and disappearing. Freddy pulls out a knife and flings it away, takes off after him like a tiger when after a fawn, moving with Dylan through this lowest level of hell, fire and steam, gushing waters, the only elements splashing through to a low staircase, turning to see Freddy. A huge and fierce splashing after him, claws flashing. Dylan turns and runs deep into the light of the fire, reaching a final chamber, a huge furnace ending in a passage, with one last look over his shoulder, telling him that he must do something fast. Dylan climbs like a little monkey and disappears into the maw of the huge furnace. This one is not fired up, but still lit from within by a huge pilot flame. Interior furnace. Dylan jumps the flame and lands singed but safe. I'm so sorry. Yeah, at the far side of the fire pit, safe for the moment as Freddy slams into the opening of the furnace, reaching for him. And though he's too big to get in fast, his claws are inching closer and closer, inches now from the boy's body. Interior of the first room. Heather drags herself up half dead, but hearing the screams of Dylan, turning to see Freddy head and shoulders inside the distant furnace. She races back and retrieves the knife. Interior furnace. Dylan looks behind, spies an access port barely larger than his head, leading outside the furnace. Knowing it's his only chance, he instantly squeezes himself into it just as Freddy's claw snacks his pajamas, pulling him back. Interior middle chamber. Heather splashes through ankle-deep water, coming in fast with blood in her eyes. She reaches the stairs and suddenly sinks to her knees in sticky goo, flailing and clawing to pull herself free. Interior furnace. Freddy, lit like a demon in hell by the flame of the pilot, reeling the kid inch by inch.
Gonna eat you up.
He has Dylan now, pulling him up to his face, opening his mouth wider and wider, unhinging his jaw like some horrendous snake, when suddenly he convulses and drops Dylan and lets out a wail. Outside furnace, Heather has made it there in time and has the knife buried deep between Freddy's legs, her body blocking the side of exactly where, but we get the idea. She shoves it hard and twists, and Freddy howls and fills the world. Inside the furnace, Dylan squeezes through the tiny aperture vent passage just outside the furnace, and Dylan looks to see in his point of view down this narrow passage and through a grill to Heather pushing at Freddy's kicking feet. Dylan rushes to help. Outside the furnace, the side vent grill pops and Dylan jumps out. And at the same time, instant, Freddy pulls his legs fully inside in terrified panic. Together, Heather and Dylan slam the main furnace door and bolt it. The screams are deafening. Heather backs away horrified, but Dylan climbs right up on the furnace, reaching for the rusted iron lever just above the door and pulls down hard. Instantly, there's a deep rumble and the furnace fills with a huge gout of flame. The child falls back amid deafening screams from the inside of the furnace. Heather sweeps Dylan up and staggers off inside the furnace, inside the flames as Freddy screams, roar. A huge gargantuan Freddy starts to outglow the flames themselves. Flames sprout from his arms and claws. His head blossoms with light, and then he's blindingly brilliant, rising, whiting out the screen. His screams turn into terrifying laughter. Then interior Dylan's room, first light. His bed as a blanket bumps up yet again, and Dylan and Heather fall out onto the floor. Heather, wet, shivering, and bloody, turns and pulls the blanket completely off the bed, wrapping it around herself and her child. And of course, there's nothing behind them now but bed. Heather turns to Dylan and pulls his head against her breast. She looks to the clock. It changes from 6:59 a.m. to 7 a.m. Then she looks to the floor. There's something there, found loosely with 3 brads. She picks it up and opens it. A script. Finished now. She looks at its top page, close up at the title page. NE7, The Ascension. Starring Heather Langenkamp as herself and Robert Englund as himself. Continue rolling credits. The end.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Hope you had a good time, and we will see you all at the next one.